Hello, my American Studies 340 students. This is Professor Collins. It is now week 11. This is our last full week of full-on readings and full-on discussion about said readings. It's basically a continuation of week 10, which is why I decided to sort of change things up week 10, allow folks to really talk about things that are a little bit more off-topic than normal. I want to return to the things that we were to talk about in week 10 and then expand on those in week 11. And so that's sort of where we're at for this week. You have two things to really think about in addition to the readings, really from this point forward. One is to finish your research project work around both the executive summary and your research paper and getting those second drafts done by November the 15th, and eventually doing a video presentation of some sort of kind that's due the weekend going into Thanksgiving week, which is November the 22nd. So that's where we are. So basically, the 8th is your second paper, the 15th is the second draft of your executive summary and your research paper, and the 22nd is your video presentation. In your video presentation, there's a lot of wiggle room that I provide in the syllabus about what you can do for a video presentation. You could literally just, put up a PowerPoint set of slides with a couple of pictures, charts, graphs, statistics, audio recording, etc. Do a podcast, wrap your way to whatever. You can be creative if you want. If you're in group discussion, basically do a back and forth around these sorts of things. My plan is to collate those video presentations and share those along with your other materials so that your peers can evaluate and review your work too, and it's not just me doing it, so that we can have discussions around it on both the 19th, I think, is when we meet after, so November the 19th, which is after your stuff is due for your second draft, and December the 3rd, which is when your video presentations should have been up for at least, say, a week to 10 days by then. So there's that. All of you should have your comments and feedback back on your first draft, so please contact me if you have any questions about that. There are a handful of you who still need to meet with me about your mid-semester assessments. We're getting to the point now where it really is more like it might as well be sort of an end-of-the-semester assessment rather than a mid-semester assessment, because we are now in week 11, and we're only meeting for one more week before we go into full-on project mode for the remainder of the semester. So there's that. Anything else that I can bring up that's kind of important to where we are right now? I think the main thing to think about really is the fact that this has been a tough slog. It really has. This class was not, like I said before, this class was not originally designed to be taught virtually. I can do it virtually. There are a lot of things I can do to help virtually, but the self-discipline and self-motivation aspect is something that might be new to you guys who are doing this online in isolation in the middle of a pandemic, and without the full support of day-to-day being around other students, other faculty members, counselors, advisors, et cetera, et cetera. And so that makes this tough, and it makes it doubly tough when you're also trying to do work that's community-based, that fulfills the CBL requirement that the course is designed with, and so on and so forth. So I acknowledge that. I recognize that. And when I finally have to go to the point of determining grades, it will not be the factor in limiting your grade to one grade versus another grade when I have to go there and try to figure it out. It won't be. Because in point of fact, a lot of this has just been a lot. It's felt like busy work. Because of the nature of where we are right now. And quite frankly, it's difficult, busy work to do at the same time. So you will not be penalized if things didn't work out for you on the CBL component part. I'm not going to penalize you. Now, I might get penalized because I wasn't able to get it to work for you, by AU, but we'll see. So that's another story. Anyway, so this week, it's like I said, it's sort of a continuation of last week, but even more focus on all these remedies. So if you really think about the last 3 weeks, if you think about weeks 9, 10, and 11 as sort of a continuum, it's really all about all these different things that K-16 education is trying to do, these institutions are trying to do, the structure of education is trying to do in the U.S. to try to ameliorate its tendency to exclude, marginalize, discriminate, segregate, set people up for failure, sort people between haves and have-nots, or in this case, people of great analytical, intellectual ability versus folks who might have other forms of intelligence but are not treated the same or treated as equals within the construct of the way American education is designed to operate. That's basically what we've been doing the last 3 weeks. So whether you're talking about corporate education reform writ large, you're talking about high-stakes testing, you're talking about magnet programs, you're talking about the rise of for-profit higher education, corporatized version, not the mom-and-pop version that Tressa Miller Cotton talks about in her book, or whether you're talking about, the Harlem Children's Zone, which Brian Jones's article, Washington and Canada, talks about, right? All of these things have been part of trying to, quote-unquote, reform education, K-12 and higher education at the same time. And I would argue, and I can make this argument, you can call this the Collins argument if you want to go there, right? And, if you look at the pieces I've given you this semester to read, it really is my argument. I would argue that all of this has been an effort to basically remake public education as we know it so that people would basically lack confidence in the system and invariably go for models that are business-related models that are based on profit, that are based on providing the illusion of choice, the illusion of merit, the illusion of, if you do these transactions that students are clients and teachers are basically customer service representatives, and the people who are running the school are basically business administrators, and their job is to make sure that the customer service people stay in line so that the clients, the students, are basically sated from the time they come into the pipeline until the time they leave. And those who aren't sated, who are not satisfied customers, either and the satisfaction comes through in their grades or lack of good grades, rather, and in their test scores and their test scores not being proficient, those customer service representatives lose their jobs. That's literally how the system is designed. It's designed on this ed reform. That's why it's called corporate ed reform. That's why Diane Ravitch and myself and Brian Jones and Tressie and other folks have figured out that this is a system that's based on a business model, these forms of reform. And so when you're looking at, how Jeffrey Canada has been able to get millions and millions of dollars from the Wallace Foundation, from the Broad Foundation, the Eli Broad Foundation, and the Walton family of Walmart, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, all these big foundations that contribute money to things like the Harlem Children's Zone, that's run by Jeffrey Canada, have contributed the money to places like University of Phoenix, Capella University, and Southern New Hampshire University, and all these other places that have gotten money to do research, to provide funds for students to go to their schools. Or even if you want to get down to the K-12 level, that the public K-12 level, the $500 million that Gates put towards teacher effectiveness through tying teaching evaluations essentially to how well students did on tests, like the PARCC assessments, these nationalized high-stakes tests where the students themselves, it doesn't, if you don't do well on the exam, it has no impact on you for the most part. I mean, there's some exceptions. I think there are some parts of the exam in certain states where they might use it to help to decide whether you graduate from high school or not, right? But for the most part, there's really no particular impact on you in a direct sense, right? But it impacts the teacher. The teacher might lose their job if you guys across the board don't do well on these exams in one particular year in that particular class, right? Which does have an impact on you because that means a lot of good teachers are leaving the profession as a result, and that's exactly what's been happening over the past decade or so. So Common Core, sponsored by Gates, Park Assessments and other assessments out west, sponsored by Gates and Wallace and all these other foundations, right? And so the result has been that you've corporatized something that was never meant to be corporatized. Education at its best, while even though it is a system of social control, it's also a system that's supposed to be part of the public good. And so all corporate education reform really has been an attempt to corporatize, make into a business something that was never designed to be a business, effectively destroying public education as we know it. Some people have gone so far as to argue that this has been an attempt to destroy teachers' unions for being too powerful. I don't know how powerful you think teachers' union is when the average teacher stays in the classroom for basically 4 to 5 years, and where the so-called bad apples within education, are so burned out by year 4 and 5 that even if they stay, they can't do their job as well because there's so many constraints in how a teacher can do their job, which you should have picked up from reading Melinda Anderson and from reading the Carrillo article and reading some of the other stuff that we've read this semester. So this is sort of a wrap-up then. Everything that we're doing over the next, we've been doing the last couple of weeks and certainly this week is sort of a wrap-up. We're going to talk a lot about Cotton's book on Thursday. That's really what I want to focus on. But I also want to talk a little bit about Brian Jones and free market idealism, right? So we're still talking about rational choice theory. We're still talking about the theory behind magnet schools. But free market idealism is an interesting thing to bring up in the midst of that, too, because, what Tressy's talking about versus what Brian Jones is talking about is interesting. There's an interesting, sort of entanglement between those two concepts, right? And then I had one other thing about this in terms of Hawks' review of EU viewings goes in the schoolyard, which is about what happens in corporate ed reform is implemented in full in the school district. It's also why I try to get you guys to watch the Frontline documentary on the education of Michelle Rhee, because Michelle Rhee basically did to D.C. public schools what Rahm Emanuel and his cronies did to Chicago public schools in the 2010s. So there's an interesting parallel there too. One other thing I should probably note is that I actually reviewed Brian Jones's article, Washington and Canada, when it was just a draft, helped as a reviewer for the Journal of Negro Education, where I've been a reviewer for about a decade now. And so it's one that I recommended this to be published as soon as I saw it, even though it needed work, because this idea of free market idealism clashes really with the whole idea of what a school is supposed to be all about. So I really want to touch on all of these things on Thursday, recognizing that we're probably not going to get all the way there, and also recognizing that there's an election coming up this week, and as a result of that, your minds might not be quite there, but we're still going to try to get there anyway. So feel free to email me, Zoom me if necessary, as part of one-on-one talks about what's going on in class, and otherwise I will see you all this Thursday for our sort of last full discussion class. Everything else is going to be either, we're not meeting because of Thanksgiving, or just meeting briefly to see where everybody is with their projects. So, all right. That's it. Have a good week.